Record. Welcome back to Total Freedom Radio with Rina Lynn, show that's all about raising the bar of knowledge, healing hurting people, and spiritual warfare. And we have Frosty Woolridge back with us today, and we're going to finish the interview that I started last week. And Frosty, without further ado, I want to give you plenty of time. So let me just ask you the first question right off the bat. What is the tragedy of the commons? Can you break that down for people?
Yes, the tragedy of the commons is I think is worthwhile for everyone, and you can go to the Garrett Hardin Society.org. Garrett Hardin is a man that lived before me, and I got to meet him also in my conferences there in Washington, D.C. over the last 25 years. And Garrett Hardin understood that you can't do and can't keep exponential growth. Again, the same kind of growth process of a cancer cell, to the point where it just multiplies and multiplies, and it destroys all the organs of, say, a human who gets cancer. And I think everyone probably listening to this broadcast has had someone suffer from cancer and die from cancer. And so the Tragedy of the Commons by Garrett Hardin, and again, Garrett Hardin Society, Hardin, Garrett, Garrett Hardin Society.org. When you have two horses in a water tank in an enclosed pasture of 5 acres, they can drink and eat all they want. Their waste will degrade and the grass will grow. And so that's remaining within the carrying capacity of the commons. And the commons is where you live and you work and you feed and you utilize your resources. But if you add 100 horses to that 5 acres, you now have a tank of water unable to provide enough water for 100 horses. Also, they eat the grass down before it can grow, and their waste cannot be degraded by the rains. That's a simple example of the tragedy of the commons. It's actually a little more complex than that, but at least you can get a handle on it. It applies to humans in the same way. And the one thing about not having enough water in that water tank, guess what happens when people all all the horses try to drink their share of the water? They start to fight. There's conflict. And then when there's starvation going on with those other 100 horses, you're getting more conflict. So the tragedy of the commons can be literally applied to American society. And if you want to look at the tragedy of the commons in places like Los Angeles and or places like New York City, notice all the aberrant behavior that goes on. That's where you get things like SVU, all the police activity from all the people that are in the concrete jungle of New York, or the concrete jungle of Miami, or the concrete jungle of places like Los Angeles. All those places have people stuffed and jammed and crammed into each other. And that's another aspect of the tragedy of the commons. And so all the aberrant behavior, the gunfights and the shooting up school systems and loss of decency and loss of morality and loss of ethics and loss of reasonable actions by the people who live there. And so that's the tragedy of the commons. And if you can really expand that into what's happening to America, it's pretty sobering, to say the least. Also, what happens about quality of life? Well, let me go back to that tragedy of the commons. And I live in Colorado, but I've traveled on every state in the union dozens of times because of my career of travel. And Colorado, the tragedy of commons is now in the camping grounds. And you just can't keep making more camping grounds, because you get the consequences of causing destruction to the people who go to the campgrounds. Only a certain percentage can go to the campgrounds. Same thing with what's going on in the skiing industry. There's only so many ski resorts, and you can't just keep building more of them, because it's called the tragedy of the commons on the highways. And I'll give you another one. For those of you who don't know this, in America, every single day of the year, a million vertebrate creatures. I mean, whether it's a rodent or whether it's a buffalo or whether it's a bear or it's a hawk or an eagle, or whether it's a coyote or whether it's a fox, a million vertebrate creatures die on America's highways every single day of the year. It comes out to about 11.4 per second. Think about that tragedy of the commons. Do all those million vertebrate creatures crossing the roads or swimming in a pond or swimming in a lake deserve to have their lives cut short by a propeller, or have their lives cut short by an airplane jet engine or a propeller airplane? That's the tragedy of the commons. And you can look this one up. A million vertebrate creatures every day die at the hands of Americans' engines, their cars, their trucks, their planes. You go on down the line, and 360 million per year. Do they deserve that kind of horrible life? There's another tragedy to commons, and I'm not sure of the numbers, but I think it's 80 million birds. It's 80 million. I'm almost sure that number's correct, but you can look it up and correct me if I'm wrong. 80 million birds fly into windows and die with broken necks.
Yeah.
And I think it's another, I think it's, I don't know what the millions is, but millions of birds die at the hands of cats, just, house cats. They kill that many birds every year. So that's another part of the tragedy of commons. And so can we keep doing that to the wildlife in America and around the world? And what's the point? I would ask you to ask yourself, what's the point of adding another 60 or 75 or 100 million people to America? Is it going to improve the tragedy of the commons? Is it going to improve the lives of the people living here as they're crammed and jammed into these concrete jungles? I mean, I've been all over China. People live in 200 and 400 square foot apartments stuck high in the sky. They cram through the streets. In India, the filth of the water, the Ganges is just one big sewer pipe. Same thing as the Yangtze River. I know both of them. I've been on both of them. So we need to have a national discussion about the tragedy of the commons. And I've only talked about a little bit of it. How about the economics and too many workers? How do you keep workers working when you keep adding millions of workers to the working pool? How do you pay a decent living wage? If you go to China, it's like slave labor. Those people work for peanuts, and their quality of life is just horrid. And so again, if you look at China's 1.44 billion people, they pay slave wages because one human is easily replaced.
Well, what about a reasonable immigration policy? Would that help?
Yes, and so in all of my books, and again the one in 2004, what would bring about some kind of reasonable and rational immigration policy? And what I ask for is a 10-year pause on all immigration, both legal and illegal. That 10-year pause, or even longer, would at least let us get our feet on the ground and maybe solve the problems that we already have here, like the 700 to 800,000 homeless in this country, the poor. The 1 in 6 Americans children have food insecurity. We've got shelves in all the food kitchens, and all the food shelves in all these different places are bare because we can't even feed our own population. But if you wanted to really, if you still felt that you want to have immigration coming into this country, we could have the ingress is equal to egress policy. So if 50,000 people leave the United States, and people do leave the United States every year, I think the numbers are around 50,000, then you could allow 50,000, but it would have to be 50,000 people who are compatible, who are educated, who speak English, and who have a cultural affinity to the United States of America. So that would be another possibility for a reasonable immigration policy. And, what about mandating an all English speaking country? And I think President Trump just mandated that America official energy or official language is
Yeah.
English. And the reason for that is because we need to stay on the same page. We as a civilization, in order to solve our problems, we have to all be able to speak with the same understandings, and that's English. Because if you have different languages, you also have different cultures, and then you have different worldviews, and then you have different ways of looking at things, and so nobody's on the same page, and then that creates conflict, and that's what you're seeing in places like California right now. You've got people at each other's throats because they speak different languages, and then you find when you have different languages, you have fracturing and fragmenting of the culture. It's no longer the American culture because we can't speak to each other. I don't know Spanish. I have no idea what Spanish is or how I can say gracias, and that's about it. And so we really need to start thinking about keeping our country on the same page, and that has to do with speaking the same language. Uh, you know, how and why do the leaders and the journalists of America avoid addressing our overpopulation crisis? Rina, I mean, you now and everyone listening to this two-part series here, I'll bet you everybody's shocked at the numbers that are coming at us, and even you are probably shocked at the numbers. Uh, why do you think the leaders of this country and the journalists of America avoid addressing the population crisis?
I was just about to ask you that.
And so, but you as a layperson, as an educator, uh, why do you think why do you think they're avoiding it? I mean, you can go to Jake Tapper, you can go to Scott Simon on NPR, you can go to Terry Gross, you can go to David Muir, you can go to Diane Sawyer, you can go to uh, CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN. None of them will talk about it. From your point of view, do you have any appreciation why? I mean, even Trump is saying, "Oh, we need more people coming into America just legally." No, we don't. We really don't need any more people coming into America legally or illegally, and we certainly don't need the birth rates of those coming in here. So, but why do you think no one understands this, or is there a mass illiteracy about what exponential growth ends up being?
I don't think that is the problem. I think it's so overwhelming now. They've created these laws, and now they really don't want the American population to understand how bad it is because then they might rise up. They might replace the leaders, they might replace the journalists, they might put some hard walls in place, and they're not ready to deal with an angry population. That would be my opinion.
Okay, well, that there's no question that that angry population is going to manifest itself in the coming years if we stay on this same trek. Much like all the people who remained in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina and died, most people don't do anything until they are in the middle of a disaster, and
Yes.
that's when they can't escape, so they die. And so as long as the journalists and the leaders of America, whether it's the U.S. senators, whether it's the U.S. House members, whether it's the governors of each state, whether it's the mayors of all these cities, I mean, let's face it, there's 3 million rats in New York City that they can't solve. They've got millions of people who are homeless in New York City, and they can't solve that. How are they going to solve any of that by adding more people? And so if we continue on this path, and I make it very clear in my books, I've made it clear in all my three books, but my books are not the only ones. I mean, there's Phil Cafaro wrote a book called "How Many Is Too Many," and he talked about America being overwhelmed. You can go right on down the line. I mean, what was it? The great, and I got to meet him. He wrote The Population Bomb. His name is, and I'm trying to think of it, I can't remember it. But he and his wife wrote The Population Bomb, and they wrote The Population uh, another one, and they told us what's coming. But there are more than a dozen other books on the fact that we don't have enough water. So the tragedy of the commons coming right at us. And so if America fails to act, then this entire civilization faces a really difficult, if not impossible, future. And we're not. You're not getting educated by CNN. You're not getting educated by MSNBC, and you're certainly not getting educated by NPR, and you're not getting educated by PBS. And it's almost ironic to me because every leader of all those different organizations has children or grandchildren, and they're going to be in the middle of a nightmare in the next 25 years as we run out of the resources to maintain ourselves. So
So what
I,
about
I
the
find it
national leaders taking action? Do you see that happening?
okay. Here's the thing about a constitutional republic: everything that happens always happens from the ground up. In other words, we the people, we're the ones that elect these individuals. And so what we need is more people to run for office that actually know what the heck's going on so that they can take action as to saving the tragedy of the commons, coming to fruition in this country. And so I would hope that everyone listening to this broadcast, this series, would understand how dire the situation is. And I'll give you the example. Right now, everything is still functioning. But if you go back to, I think it was 1912, April the 14th, the greatest steamship in the world, the HMS Titanic, was literally charging through the North Atlantic waters, but they were filled with icebergs. In the dead of night, you can't see the icebergs so quickly. And before you know it, the speed of the Titanic, they spotted the iceberg right in front of them. And it takes a mile or two just to turn the Titanic. And of course, you all know the story of the Titanic. 1,500 people died. They didn't have enough boats. And everybody was still dancing just before the Titanic hit. And they kept dancing an hour after the Titanic hit. Well, we're in the same boat here. It's 2025. Everything is still operating just fine. You've got all your crime. You've got shoplifting. You've got criminals. You've got illegals. You've got the deportations coming on. You've got MS-13. You've got 270,000 young kids have died from fentanyl overdoses in the last 4 years. But mostly the country is operating. But what happens when the water runs out? What happens when the gasoline runs out? What happens when we just don't have the energy to really plant the food and then harvest the food and distribute the food? We're just like the HMS Titanic. And so I bring it to you, since the national leaders aren't doing anything, and they aren't. They're not addressing this. The leaders of 60 Minutes won't address this. I've given all my books to the top networks in the country 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and even 3 years ago to interview me and give the same information that you've received on Rina's show. And so what does it get down to? It's you, the individual citizen. Every citizen of America needs to write. You need to call, you need to email, you need to text, you need to visit your governor, your mayors, your city councils, your school boards, your networks, your radio shows, and more to create a national discussion and debate. Only then does our civilization stand a chance of surviving the 21st century. And I can say this unequivocally as a citizen of America and a senior citizen at that. Overpopulation in the United States will become the single greatest issue facing Americans in the 21st century. We either solve it proactively or nature will solve it brutally for us via water shortages that cannot be solved an energy crisis that's irreversible and unsolvable, massive air pollution, gridlocked cities, loss of quality of life, species extinction rates, loss of personal freedoms, limitations to everything that we do, and even worse, the conflict over what we have left. Rena, I hope that gives everyone a solid understanding of what we're facing, where we are, and what we can do in the future
It's
to
very
save
sobering. If
ourselves.
you'll give me just one moment to acknowledge my sponsors, then I've got a
Mhm.
question for you.
Okay, so
Right. Are you looking for a cozy escape? Why not visit an English style tea room in downtown Kilgore, Texas, where every bite is a taste of tradition? From delicious sandwiches and scones to the finest teas, they've got something for every craving. Even if you're planning a special event, they've got room for that, and their charming space is perfect for private parties, baby showers, and more. So treat yourself today at the Grand Empress Tea Room, where good food and great memories are made. You can go to rinalyn.com and you can click in through the affiliates page, or you can look it up on www.grandempress.com. I was actually there last Friday night for a murder mystery dinner. Very interesting evening. They have some really great actors. All right. And the next one, we have Simply Clean Foods. Now, their primary focus is to bring clean food to people all around the world and change the way we look at freeze dried food in our daily cooking. As the a community focused company, they strive to help our veterans through food donations, and they provide food to victims of natural disasters. This is one of the things that Frosty was talking about that will be affected down the road. If you can't grow the food, you don't have it to freeze dry it. So I would say put your money in some now, put it up, and prepare for these days that are coming. Simply Clean Foods is dedicated to providing the best quality food you can buy next to fresh from a farmer's market. Their stringent quality controls and absolute zero GMO policy and their testing for heavy metals makes them unique in the storable foods market. And I love the fact that they have reclosable bags. So they've got a line of fruits, vegetables, meats, they've even got herbs for suitable for everyday use. And you don't have to worry about ever throwing food away because you just get out what you need, seal it back up, and you've got a couple of months or so to eat the rest of it. And now back to Frosty. Let me find my little spot here. Frosty, you've talked a little bit about what we can do as individual citizens, but we've got children coming up. They're in schools. How is this affecting them in schools, and how would you guide them as they grow up to prepare for a world that is going to be more overpopulated? And a secondary question, I'll just ask them both and you can take it. Um, what do you see as a ground roots movement? How do we move the administrations that don't want to hear from us? And we've got 4 minutes, sir.
well, thank you for those questions, Rena. As a former elementary teacher and a high school teacher and a college instructor, for me, as an educator, the key is personal involvement. You really need to go to your school boards. You need to have a class that, a graduate, in order to graduate, you need to have a mandatory class on environment. And in that environmental class, you really have to educate the young as to the driver of all the consequences that are going on around the world right now. As a matter of fact, Jacques Cousteau said it. He's an oceanographer. He's the one that got me into scuba diving back in 1963. We must alert, I'm quoting, we must alert and organize the world's people to pressure world leaders to take specific steps to solve the two root causes of environmental crisis: exploding human population growth and extreme consumption of irreplaceable resources. Overpopulation underlies every environmental problem we face today, unquote. That was by Jacques Cousteau, and that was a quote from over 40 years ago. Well, I've said the same thing in this series. And so you've got to get down to your school boards, you've got to get to your college classrooms, you've got to get to the mayors, you've got to get to literally the city councils, and you've got to really talk about population stabilization and how to do it. and that is the key, is that education. And then when your second question, uh, it's going to be, in order to change the direction of a civilization, you've got to either vote for those who are speaking on the same page you are. I've gone to my two senators, both Bennett and I went to Udall before him, and I went to Hickenlooper. I've gone to their offices and tried to educate them. And unfortunately, so many times you get these kinds of people. Bennett is useless. He's open borders and he's pro mass immigration, along with Hickenlooper, who was also the governor. And now Polis is the governor of Colorado. He's an open borders congressman. Now he's the open borders, uh, you know, uh, governor of Colorado. They don't have a clue. So what we have to do is vote those into office that do have a clue, and vote those school boards into, literally educating the youth. And at some point, we could get over the top, and enough people would move toward education and then change of policy. And that's about the only way we're going to be able to save ourselves.
I see that. We've got a minute and a half, Frosty. What would you like to say to everyone?
Well, in the end, it's up to you. We don't live in China where it's a dictatorship. We don't live in India where it's such a mess, there's no way to solve it. I mean, India has gone way beyond failsafe. They can't solve their problems. And so we, as American citizens, we have to create a national debate and discussion through our actions. And those actions, as I've already written and I've already talked about, it's all up to you, whether it's what in your local community. And so that's the key here. And I would wish each and every one of you to take this seriously, because what you do or you don't do in the coming decade is going to affect your children. Either it's going to give them a quality of life and a free society and a sustainable society, or you're going to leave your children a horrible mess that no one's going to be able to solve. And it's going to have we're going to have a very unsustainable civilization, and we're going to come into conflict with ourselves. And we can change all that by our actions today. So I wish you well, and I hope I can come back and talk about it some more in the future.
I'd
And
love
God
that.
bless
And
America.
Frosty, thank you so much. And audience, thank you for joining us at the Total Freedom Show. And I will see you next week.